discussion with the President regarding the South African economy and the kinds of reforms that we are busy with in South Africa. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Madame Lagarde to make a few comments. And then after that, we will take a few questions. And as usual, just identify yourself and the media house that you represent. Madame Lagarde.
Thank you so much, Governor Kganyago. Almost. We call each other by our first name, so it's a bit of an exercise to actually pronounce properly your last name.
Done well.
So, my friend Lesetja, thank you very much for having us in your central bank. I was only too pleased to be visiting yet again South Africa. This is my second visit as managing director of the IMF, and it's long overdue, frankly, because I try to visit each and every G20 country at least every other year, and I hadn't been back in South Africa in 5 years. So when President Ramaphosa invited me to come and visit South Africa, last time we met, I said, absolutely, this is the right time for me to come, and I thank you for being here at that close to the holiday season and the spot sometimes of for some of you your holiday full stop. We had excellent discussions this morning with President Ramaphosa about the state of the South African economy, both from a fiscal, from a monetary, and from a structural point of view. I have to say, and I have to confess, that I have been always, ever since I have met him, enthused with his focus on governance, his focus on unleashing the potential of South African growth, and we see it as perfectly suited given the challenges ahead, notably the unemployment of youth in South Africa, the need to increase growth, and to actually unleash the potential that that youth has in this beautiful country of yours. And I'm absolutely confident that President Ramaphosa has his eyes on the right objectives and is very, very focused on what he wants to deliver for the country together with his team. As I said, his focus on governance is very well taken, and it so happens that the IMF is also focusing significantly on governance, on the fight against corruption, and I had the honor to receive full endorsement of the entire board of the IMF to actually focus on those issues going forward across the globe and on all our membership. The second area that we discussed was optimizing public spending in order to really make sure that the public purse is used to the best possible, for the best possible purpose. And that is certainly an area where we can provide technical assistance, where we can provide support, where we can provide the comparing of the best practices or the good practices around the world in order for the authorities to conduct that task, which is tedious, difficult, and for which it is critically important to have institutions that are strong, that have the bench, the depth, and the determination to actually conduct that exercise, eliminating leakages, removing exemptions when there are too many of them, and making sure that public money is actually properly collected and properly spent, and that there is accountability in the process. The third area that we discussed, which is also, in our view, very important, is this issue of concentration in the industry at large, and by that I mean products and services alike. And the fact that with not enough competition, there are bottlenecks in the economy. There are prices that could certainly be lower. And it's an area where clearly the President is interested in whatever advice, data, best practices we can offer as part of that partnership relationships that we have had for many years with the country. So that's really the bulk of what we have discussed. I've taken together with my team the head of the African department, Mr. Abe Selassie, our mission chief, Annalisa, and Monty, who is our senior resident representative. We have discussed those issues as well with some of the economic ministers, those who were in town, namely Minister Patel and Minister Davis, for their respective domain. With that, I'm happy to take your instructions and maybe your questions.
Right, we are now open for questions. Please identify yourself and the media house that you represent. Right at the back.
Hi, Ms. Lagarde, Bonga Dulane from EWN. You just mentioned an interesting point right here regarding public institutions, the importance of them, and you come to a country right now where there's state capture, there's a commission looking into that, what has been happening. So what's your confidence in South Africa in spending public money facing these challenges and also taking into consideration the challenges facing state-owned enterprises and the commission looking into them, especially when it comes to corruption? Thank you.
Well, I can only say, based on the experience that we have from other countries, that attacking head-on these issues of corruption and doing it in a transparent and accountable way is only going to improve the state of the economy. There's a lot of work to be done. I'm really very positive about the proposal, and I saw that it is certainly the President's endeavor to get to the bottom of it and to support this project of removing this state capture that has taken place over the course of previous years, and I'm sure that there will be a lot of good coming out of it, even though the process itself is painful for some. But for the population of South Africa, it's very much needed.
Ferial?
Ferial Hafaji from Fin24. I wanted to ask Madame whether South Africa will seek IMF support and if that came up in discussions. Also, whether you think the reforms are deep enough to stave off a sub-investment grade rating.
Well, I can reassure you on the first point, I am not here to discuss any kind of financial support or to negotiate any kind of program, and I have not received any request to that effect. So that's crystal clear. And I hope it puts to bed some of the rumors or noises that I have seen here and there about this particular matter. No, not at all. In terms of reforms, I think that there is a momentum. I could certainly feel it in the discussion that we had this morning. There are multiple areas to address, and I was pleased, for instance, to hear that the competition tools that will help address the issue of concentration is already well underway. And during the lunch I had today with business leaders, all of them women, of all ages, from 26 with start-uppers and social entrepreneurs to the high-ranking female leaders in the country, the sense that reforms is a necessary process in order to support the business, the activity, and improve the ranking of the country is really considered very favorably and with great support. I had a chance to meet President Ramaphosa on a few occasions before this meeting, and the last time we met, we discussed extensively the land expropriation without compensation, as he had described it to me. And I understand and he explained to me in very clear details the symbolic value associated with that project, the constitutional basis that is necessary and that has served the country well in the past, present, and hopefully future. And you know, we have a few ideas as to how to make that principle effective, practical, reasonably well accepted, despite the you know, the difficulty of those who eventually will have to relinquish some of their current title to assets, so to speak. So we appreciate that, and we appreciate the sort of benefit, cost-benefit analysis that has been brought to bear in order to support and pursue this process. On the second point, you know, we say and repeat the world over, particularly in view of the changes that will affect the future of work, that education, if anything, is the investment that is going to actually help the youth of this world and the youth of this country to be able to adjust, to learn how to learn, to have a broader horizon than mine or maybe yours. And in that context, clearly free higher education is a very strong tool. Now, with it comes the question of how is it financed? And that is where there are trade-offs and where, you know, sound fiscal policies, which we have advocated again this morning by suggesting that there be growth-friendly fiscal consolidation going forward, which means not austerity, which means not cutting across and hair-cutting spending, but selecting those spending that will actually favor growth going forward. And it is clear that education is one of those projects, one of those massive undertakings that are warranted.
We've got 3 more. Oh, okay, let's start with you now.
Madame Lagarde, it's Pranesha Naidu from Bloomberg News. I've been wanting to know what you see as the biggest risks to the South African economy, what can be done to mitigate these risks, and also you said you're not in the country to discuss any packages, but if called upon by Eskom, would the IMF extend a loan to them?
On your second question, it's dead easy. The answer is no, absolutely not, because we only deal with members. And no private company, no public company, whether state-owned or not, is a member of the IMF. So that's you know, extremely easy. No is the answer. Now I've lost track of your first one. Oh, the risks. Yeah, I think, you know, I would say 2 things. One is complacency. I don't see that, but I'm very hopeful that the strength of an institution like the central bank, or the strengthening of the treasury, are issues that are high on the agenda, and that there is never complacency about it. A sound monetary policy that walks on its 2 legs is precious and needs to be secured. A good, solid treasury that doesn't compromise is a precious institution that needs to be secured and protected. I would say the second one, which is always a danger, is this gap between high expectations, which many of us saw earlier in the year, and the inevitable slower delivery of change, given the vested interest, given the rent seekers communities that you have to displace a little bit, that you have to disrupt a little bit. And that slow movement can create frustration and the sense in the community that delivery is not fast enough. So I think that to the extent you can, you as media actually, if you can just communicate that timing is not instant, and gratification cannot be just like clicking on an application. It comes with a lot of hard work.
Okay, the last 2 questions. Vuyo. Okay, just keep those hands up so that I know that they are really the last ones. Vuyo, Arabile, you, ma'am, and you. Vuyo?
Thanks very much, Governor Vuyo Mvoko from ENCA. Just picking up on the last point you made, that the gulf between the high expectations and the pace of delivery. From the numerous conversations you're saying you've had with President Ramaphosa, is it your understanding that expropriation without compensation will have only symbolic value, as you put it? And then the next and last question.
Can I just stop you a second? I didn't say that that was the only aspect of it.
Okay, thanks. And the other question is, there's a view that central banks across the world are coming under increasing pressure from politicians in particular. Do you share that view, or what is your experience?
Well, what we're witnessing in many corners of the world is effectively that central banks and central bankers in particular are sometimes under undue criticism in various places. I'm delighted that this is not the case in South Africa, and that my friend Lesetja, Governor Kganyago, is not under such pressure, and I think it gives him the independence and the credit to actually be able to sustain a monetary policy that has kept the country and the economy in good stead.
Arabi.
Madam Lagarde and Governor Kganyago, Arabile Komete from the SABC. Madam Lagarde, I wanted to ask you whether it is still far off and your tenure is still for another 3 years, but with the change in sort of the economic sort of aspects and the environment that is as it currently stands with China, as we want to call it, as an emerging nation, would you be willing at the end of your term to give off, if I could call it that, your reign to an emerging nation, if that, perhaps to more help the emerging nations feel like they're actually part of the process?
Okay, 2 points on that one. I'm not sure that I'm prepared to give my rent to anybody, from emerging or otherwise for that matter, actually. And second, you know, I really do my best together with all staff to actually serve the entire international community, whether they are advanced, whether they are emerging, whether they're low-income economies. And that's my allegiance to stability, prosperity, irrespective of size and degree of development of the membership. Yeah. And by the way, if I was to make a mistake on that front, somebody here would stand to correct me, because he's my boss as head of the IMFC, for those of you who don't know.
Madam Lagarde, Fifi Peters from CNBC Africa. In your conversations with the President and the ministers from the economic clusters, what was said about increasing the level of private sector investment? Because right now it's going in the opposite direction that is needed to grow this economy. Were there any tangible solutions put on the table to help fix this? Because so far, even amendments that the government has made by way of things of the land reform policy, and even the mining charter and the education drive that my colleague here mentioned, haven't been good enough to prop up private sector investment. We saw third quarter figures pointing to another contraction. So what was shared, and perhaps is there any, I think, that the IMF can share with South Africa in terms of getting business on board? Because I imagine you'd agree that growing this economy would need to be a collaborative between all stakeholders.
Yes, and we are very, very strongly of the view that there shouldn't be any crowding out of the private sector, and the private sector has to be a driver in that increased investment, which will lead to increased growth, which will create the jobs of the future. And there are no magic recipes. Predictability, fiscal discipline, debt sustainability, a policy mix that will actually give to the investors the environment that will be conducive to their business is generally what is expected on their part. A strong dialogue with them on a constant basis as well. I very much hope that those numbers could reverse. I heard some fairly positive numbers on the part of Minister Davis after the investment summit that took place, I think in October, and where some pledges were made. But from pledges to actual delivery, there is always a bit of a journey, and that needs to be checked.
I heard you talk about contraction in the third quarter. We actually had an expansion in the third quarter. So you are referring to investment?
I was referring to fixed private sector capital investment,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
There was an expansion, you say?
No. I thought you were referring to the economic growth.
No. I
Okay.
wasn't referring to the money that the private sector is putting in.
Okay, good. That's the last one. You're the last one.
Yes, Emma Rumney from Reuters. My question's on Zimbabwe. What does the IMF see as the biggest impediments to Zimbabwe's economic recovery, especially given the return of inflation? And I have a second question on Mozambique, if you have time to answer it. Has your team found that Mozambique's debt will be sustainable under the proposed restructuring plan? And do you expect Mozambique to get another IMF program, and if so, what type in 2019?
You know, to the risk of disappointing you, I'm going to defer your questions to Abe, who is just in front of you, who is the head of the African department, because he has much clearer views and better technical responses to offer to you, because I would give you some generalities about Zimbabwe, which would not be of help to your agency.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Abe, if you could click on your mic.
So on Zimbabwe, we are in discussions with the authorities on how we can, modalities on how we can try and support the program. Since there is, the country still has outstanding significant debt issues, until those are resolved, it will be difficult for the IMF to support the reform program through a financing envelope, but there are other means in which we can support them, and we're in active discussions with the authorities. With respect to Mozambique, we have for some time laid out the 3 conditions for us to move forward with the program engagement. One has been clarifying the circumstances around the borrowing that the government had undertaken earlier, getting clarity on the audits that have been going on. Those processes are still unfolding, and we're awaiting those results. And then there are 2 more technical issues, more in the control of the authorities. One is making sure that the overall debt position is sustainable, and that may include further debt restructuring considerations, but we haven't looked at that in totality yet. And then the other consideration is, reaching agreement on the parameters on the program. Once those are in place, we will be able to move forward with support.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your attendance. That concludes the proceedings of today. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
All right. Yeah, that was the presser there with the Managing Director of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, and our very own Governor of the Reserve Bank, Lesetja Kganyago.
Who happens to be on the Finance Committee of the IMF as well.
Yes, indeed. And they've met many, many times, particularly in those gatherings that take place, of course, in the United States. But she said, look, I'm very happy to be here. This is my 2nd visit to South Africa. She was here 5 years ago, and she said she had really good discussions with the President earlier today. Broad terms, the state of the economy. And she says she was enthused at the energy and the direction in which the President is taking in dealing with some of the issues that are burdening the country at this stage.
Yeah, certainly, of course, saying that she's very much convinced that President Cyril Ramaphosa is focusing on governance, looking also into the issues around corruption here in South Africa. She made mention of 2 issues that needs to be focused at: the youth unemployment, as well as the need to increase growth in our economy as well.
And also the importance of optimizing public spending. So she wasn't talking about austerity, but saying that we need to more efficiently deploy public funds and public resources in the right growth stimulating environments. And she says that as the IMF, they can assist because they've got a broad range of best practice that they've learned around the globe, that she may be able to assist with the country. No financial support is destined or asked for by South Africa, so wherever that rumor was doing the rounds, that's not why she's here, and so South Africa is not seeking any funding from the IMF. So land expropriation, of course, that's a question that's bound to come up all of the time, and she says that the President did spend time explaining to her just how important the land issue is in South Africa, and how using the Constitution it's going to be done properly. And she says that they have a few ideas on how it could be done practically. There will be some pain for some people who'll have to let go of some land, but she says cost-benefit analysis it'd probably be a good thing for all at the end.
All right, yes, our reporter Arabile Gumeto is there, and I believe in a short while we'll get in touch with him to sort of wrap up this particular media briefing. So we're taking an ad break now.